Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast, where we talk about real leadership, real stories by real human beings with real solutions, and no excuses are allowed. Today, we're going to talk about how many men in our world are struggling from confusion to what it means to be a man, to loneliness and isolation from one another, to addiction and despair in the face of challenges that never go away, because being a man is hard and it's only getting harder. Our guest today is the founder and creator of Manhood Tribes. He has served as a pastor and ministry leader for the past couple of decades and has led and worked with men in a wide variety of settings. He loves the outdoors. He wants you to know beach and mountains, all things Lord of the Rings, and has a slight addiction to Coke Zero. He lives with his wife and two sons in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, on a more serious note, no matter what kind of tribe you connect with, you can always expect a manhood tribe experience to help you grow in three main areas: manhood, camaraderie, and freedom. Please welcome Don Ross to the show. Don, dude, it's great to have you here. I'm calling this a tough love Thursday moment. We're gonna have a tough conversation about a tough topic. So,
Sounds great.
if we ruffle some feathers out there, they probably needed it.
Let's do it, Pat.
All
I'm
right,
glad to be here. Appreciate you having me on the show.
I'll tell you what. This is gonna be a great conversation, and I want to jump into one of the first things. And I know there's some specific topics we're gonna dive into, but you have identified what you call the five marks of manhood. What are they, and what's the story behind identifying these specific five marks?
Yeah. Well, I won't bury the lead. I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll kind of come back and explain how we got there. So
All
the
right.
five marks are strength, courage, skill, honor, and allegiance. Okay, one more time, just real quick: strength, courage, skill, honor, and allegiance. So what are these things, and what do they mean? So for me, like you mentioned, kind of in my bio, I've been in ministry work for a couple decades. Have worked with men in pretty much kind of every setting that I've been in, and what I noticed in just about every setting is that ministries and churches were working really hard at trying to be able to help men understand what it meant to be a good man, which is a great. That's a good thing to be able to figure out. Maybe depending on the setting that you're in, they would call that a biblical man. But whatever that looked like, we were kind of going after that definition. But over time, what I began to really see is that men were. They were interested in that, but they were also just really kind of asking a question that kind of came before that question, which was really just, okay, but what does it mean to be a man? Like good or biblical or otherwise? Where's like the starting block, right? We've gotten so lost and confused in our culture around the idea of gender that it's really become confusing to just even be able to say this is what a man is. So that's where I've kind of began to just explore, both for myself and out of a desire to help other guys in ministry settings, to be able to kind of answer that question: what is a man? And I looked at all kinds of things, Pat. I did a whole bunch of reading. I did a bunch of research. I watched a bunch of man movies. I interviewed a bunch of men, older and younger. Just tried to really get a feel for, like, how do men think about manhood, or even when we don't necessarily talk about it, like, how are we living it? What does it look like for men to live out manhood pretty much wherever they've been? And as I kind of explored all of that, the long story short is that these five things are kind of what I arrived at. That when you look at men across pretty much all times, all cultures, these five traits tend to regularly show up. So strength, courage, skill, honor, and allegiance were really kind of like, this is what it looked like to be a man. If you were a male and you were displaying those things, that's what was kind of expected of you. That's what manhood looked like in pretty much every culture. It didn't necessarily tell you what it meant to be a good man or a virtuous man or a Christian man, right? Those things add on some things to the list, and even tend to even being a Christian man, sometimes at different points in time, that has looked very different in terms of what that definition has looked like. like. But these kind of like baseline traits are really sort of the things that that I saw. Like, okay, wherever we've found manhood, we have seen these things in place, and so that's where I wanted to kind of like to just start from, to be able to say, you know, being a man really shouldn't be that hard, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
been like 50% of the population has done it well for most of history. It's really just kind of only been lately that we've been struggling with it and kind of had a hard time figuring it out. So it seemed like the baseline ought to be pretty basic, ought to be easy to understand, ought to be easy to attain as well. And so that's really kind of what the 5 marks of manhood is about, is to say, here's what it looks like. And as a man or as a male, you can exhibit these traits as a way of being able to demonstrate what it means to be a man. And one of the best things about it is that you can grow in every one of them. So no matter where you're kind of feeling like you're starting from, you know, manly or not, whether you're, you know, really good at some of them, maybe you're a skillful guy who doesn't feel like he's very strong, or maybe you're a guy who possesses a lot of honor but doesn't feel like he has very much courage. You know, like you can grow in any of them, and that's really what's kind of great about it. You're not stuck where you're starting at today. You can get better at being a man just by learning to advance in any of these 5 marks.
Wow. I'm writing notes as you're talking, and
All right.
it's like, man, uh, your five marks. I mean, if you could do it from a quote unquote religious, you can use the Bible and starting with Adam and Eve, starting with Adam specifically, all the way through scriptural history, theological history, you could see the strengths and weaknesses of the men throughout the history of the world from its
Yeah.
creation. And then if you go, well, okay, I'm not really a faith-based person, then I'd say, okay, well, let's just look at the documented history of mankind, and you could go from prehistoric to current, and you can still see those 5 marks, you
Yep.
know, and where people, whether it's a David or a Solomon or Cain and Abel, scripturally or just historically, you can see where men excelled or failed in any one of those 5 marks and the consequences it had on that society or that time
Yeah.
period of history.
Yeah.
Now, I know one of the things that you talk about is uh, a lot of and I'm in the Catholic Church, and we have here in Colorado. It started here in Colorado. It's just starting to grow. We call it Inferno, and it's a men's group. And
Okay.
you talk about manhood, camaraderie, freedom. Your 5 markers. We meet in small core groups, and then we have bigger conferences. And man, jump right into these topics, no holds bar, and we're not going to accept any excuses in it.
Yeah.
But one of the things you talk about, and this is kind of interesting because I see this as a truth bomb, even in the Catholic Church. Most men's group are mediocre at best.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I know you go, and I know you're. I want to hear your explanation because I
Yeah.
know what it is. I don't know the explanation. I know what the spoiler is because those groups were designed for women.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, hot take a little bit here, you know, my experience with men's groups, but, yeah, you know, I would say, Pat, both from my own personal experience and just from, I mean, literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of guys that I've, you know, talked to and worked with over the years. Uh, Most guys are not drawn to church men's groups. They just aren't set up well to be able to connect with guys the way that we connect with each other and connect with our faith. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. So let me try to explain a little bit. It doesn't take a lot of explanation to be able to say that, most men's groups don't connect well with guys. That's a numerical and statistical fact. You look at pretty much any church, Protestant, Catholic, or otherwise, and you're going to find far more women's groups than you have men's groups. You're going to find far more women involved in groups than you do men in groups. And that's pretty much across the board. You'll find some, anomalies and outliers here and there, but for the most part, that is a trend that holds really strongly throughout the West, but in America especially. And there's a lot to be said about that, but I think that largely what that's about is that the small group model that the modern church really has kind of adapted is built around the felt needs of women. The way that we think about how we do groups is really built around the ways that women connect with each other. So, women tend to be more naturally social creatures than men are. Women tend to enjoy learning, and that doesn't mean that men don't enjoy learning, but women enjoy learning in a way that it feels like when they learn, it feels like they've accomplished something. We see this be true this is one of the things that contributes to the disparity between boys and girls in schools right now. That the school system seems to be better set up for girls when it comes to learning than it is for boys, because the objective of our schools is really just to pass information along. Excuse me. Girls tend to do that well and to feel like they've accomplished something when they've absorbed information. Guys tend to feel like they've accomplished something when they've got results, right? When we've done something that we can show, that's when we tend to feel like we've accomplished something. So, you've got a group that's kind of focused on social aspects, getting together for the sake of getting together. You've got groups that tend to be focused on learning, right? We study the Bible, we study a book, we go through a video series. Our discussion questions tend to be based around information. They're not always based around what do we do with this? How does this, actually matter to my day-to-day life? We might not even actually talk about our day-to-day lives. We're just talking about information. So you got all of these things as sort of like the swirling ingredients. And then you kind of throw into the mix that most groups tend to be more emotionally focused than they are action focused, meaning that when we do talk about the kind of the meaningful stuff, it's how does it impact us? How does it affect us? What does it stir up in us? How does it inspire us? All those kinds of things. They're very emotion-based questions. Again, that tends to be more the realm of women than it does of men. Not that men don't have emotions or shouldn't pay attention to our emotions, just that women tend to be stronger in that arena than men do. Men tend to be stronger in the arena of action, right? We tend to be more go-oriented and do-oriented than women are. But we don't, for the most part, our groups aren't focused on action. They're focused on socialization, and they're focused on emotion, and they're focused on learning. So none of those things are bad. And then again, it doesn't mean that men can't do any of those things. It just means that women, they tend to be much more on the surface level of needs for women than they do for men. So it's no real surprise then that when you have a small group model that works really well for women and that works really well for couples because women are drawn to it and they'll pull their men into it with them. But then you try to apply that same model to your men's groups, your guys don't show up. Or they show up once or twice and then they don't keep coming, right? And we see this everywhere among men's groups. And it's really just because we're not trying to connect with men and to connect men to each other in the ways that we actually like to do that. We don't build things around action. We don't build things around results and accomplishment. We don't build things around doing and challenge is one of the things that I left out. Men like to be challenged. They like to feel like where they're starting from is not where they're going to end up, and that they're going to be pushed along the way to become something different. And we don't do most of that in the way that we do groups. So, all that's a little bit of like theory and head knowledge, but it's kind of with those things that I really set out to say, I think we can do a better job of this. Like, I think we actually could build a better group experience for men if we tried to pay attention to some of those things in the way that we set up a group. And that's really kind of how I landed on this model for what I call a tribe, and what it looks like to kind of be together as men is kind of through this tribe model.
Yeah. Two things that popped to mind. It seems like every show I have to preface before I start talking. I'm like the Irish setter that sees a squirrel running across the backyard, and I go, "Boom, man!" And so as I'm listening, you're triggering that Irish setter in me, and two thoughts I think that that we all know Hang on, I got to finish this note. Two things that we've always heard, expressions that we've always heard that you have so succinctly kind of identified what that is, what those things mean. One of them is we all have heard about nature versus nurture, from psychologists and all that
Sure.
kind of stuff. Yeah, you go to a parenting class, all those things, or you got a degree in psychology is well, is this something nature or something nurture, something learned or something innate, that kind of back and forth conversation. And the aha moment I have as you're talking is, man, you just described nature. That's man, hunter, gatherers, doers, uh, you know, nose to the grindstone. We were all raised, even though I disagree with this philosophy, this mindset, because it's not always healthy. But if you want it done right, do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, add, and then from the nurture side is that's what our mothers were. That's what our sisters were, particularly if you were a younger brother kind of deal, is they had that nurturing mindset, or which would explain this long held uh, African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And part of that village experience is who's nurturing and raising the children while the men were out hunting and gathering or whatever. And
Sure.
then and you can really even look at it if you go back to Cain and Abel. One's a hunter and one's the gatherer, and ego is the enemy, and we know the rest of that story.
Sure.
So, so I love how you describe that, because it's so true that if you invited a bunch of men to, hey, we're going to have a potluck dinner, men only potluck dinner, and bring your favorite recipe, and they're going to go, yeah, man, dude, I looked at my calendar, I'm busy that night.
Yeah.
If you go, hey, man, we're going to have beer and wings, and we're going to do a football fantasy league, you wouldn't have enough seats for people to sit down,
Right. Right.
kind of deal. And so that's what the insights you're given are based in, I think, all of our experiences.
Yeah.
It then becomes, which I think is a natural transition into both the book that you've written, bestseller, and the things that you're doing, is you talk about the three pillars of community.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that look like? If we have that big 30,000-foot view of men and women,
Yeah.
well, what's down on the ground? What's that foundation and the framework
Yeah.
for that masculinity part of the village that it takes to raise a
Yeah.
child?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I kind of set out and said, hey, I think I can build a better widget here. I think I can make a men's group that actually is something that men want to be a part of. The three kind of pillars that I base it on are, and you've mentioned them: manhood, camaraderie, and freedom. And so I really tried to say I think these things are kind of the magic ingredients of what can make a men's group work. So the first one obviously is manhood. We've talked a little bit about that already. In our culture in particular, we need some clarity and definition around what it means to be a man and what, as men, is expected of us as we contribute to this group, this community, right? So what does it mean to be a man? So in our tribe model, we talk about the 5 marks of manhood. But we don't just talk about them. We try to grow and get better at them, right? So it's not just theory, it's actually action and challenge. We do things that help us to get better at being a man. We actually, once a month, build for each other in our groups. We build what we call manhood challenges. And it really is just like a simple way to be able to say, how are you going to try to get better at one of these 5 marks this month? What are you going to do to be able to improve in that? Maybe it's that you've got you want to grow in the area of skill, and in particular, this is one I'm dealing with right now because I'm in the midst of having to handle some car issues. So like everything related to cars is something I feel like I'm really lacking in skill. So trying to figure out how can I develop some skill challenge that help me with learning to change my own oil, or, what does it look like to be, basic things like changing a tire, but maybe even some more advanced things like, getting under the hood and dealing with things like belts and spark plugs and, all that. Most of
Yeah.
that is completely foreign to me, but those are skills that are good to have as a man. So, it could be something like that. It could be something more like, I really need to grow in the area of courage. I'm talking with a guy right now who is in a place where he's in his work environment and he kind of feels like he knows he's discontent with his job, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of his own fault because he's got a boss that's a little difficult and he won't speak up to his boss about the things that are not enjoyable about his job because he's a little bit afraid of how those conversations are going to go with his boss. So, a courage challenge for him is really like, how do you have some of those hard conversations? How do you actually step into the thing that you're afraid of and confront it and see what happens on the other side? There's no way to know what the outcome is going to be until you try it. But if you lack in courage, you're probably never going to try. So the courage challenge is kind of like building up to being able to do some of those difficult kinds of things in life. So, it can be anything. It really, there's just about anything in your life that feels like an obstacle that needs overcoming can in some way be a manhood challenge. And so that's what we try to do, is build those things that help us get better in those areas.
Wow.
So that's the first one. I'll stop there. You probably got questions on that. So
Yeah,
I'll stop there before I go on to the other two.
A little bit more, just like of an insight, because again, the squirrel just ran across the backyard. Is and I didn't think of this before the episode, so of course I have no thing I can reference immediately. But we had a guest on the show several months ago. And there's two cops in North Carolina, and they have an organization called Runwell. And they're doing what you're talking about, particularly with at-risk young men in high schools.
Awesome. Oh, great.
Fantastic. And they talk about, and Runwell as in like Paul saying, I've run the race.
Run the race well.
And from simple things of, how to tie a tie and look professional when you're going to go to a maybe a job interview, or that first, you want to go to the prom, but you don't want to go looking like a gangbanger kind of thing, and those kind of manly characteristics that would fall into those areas that you're talking about. And then the other thing there, if you haven't read this book, get it. And if you want a thing on challenges for men, it's called Deliberate Discomfort.
Okay. I have heard that. Yeah.
He's a retired lieutenant colonel, special forces, out of the Army, Jason Van Camp, and lives over in Utah. And it's a book. It has 10 or 12 stories told by someone in the military that in some capacity he had crossed paths with, two of whom are living Medal of Honor recipients. And I mean some really significant. Flo Goldberg is in the book, and he's a living Medal of Honor. But he talks about deliberately embracing discomfort, and from a manly standpoint, and he does mind, body, and spirit. Hey, 90-day challenge. You have to reach out and reconnect with somebody every day for 90 days that you have lost connection with for whatever reason. Yeah. And and he has a Friday check-in. And if you're honest and go, man, I only touched that base with 6 people. I was really too busy on Monday or whatever. And he's like, dude, I'm sorry, no excuses. You go back to week 1. So you guys start over, kind of deal. And then there's physical fitness challenges and spiritual challenges and mind, heart, and soul. It's a great book. So what you shared in that manhood thing just really resonates with, I think, of a renaissance, if you will, or revival of manhood in today's society.
Yeah.
And one of the big things is because we, as men, we can become very egocentric and isolated, and we don't know how or sometimes don't even want to try to make genuine friendships, camaraderie
Yeah.
with other men.
Yeah.
So, and I know so you talk about that. That's pillar two.
That's pillar number 2. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we how do we develop significant friendships as men as opposed to, hey, yeah, man, I haven't talked to you in 6 months. Let's go
Right.
grab a beer.
Yeah. So okay, so you're right on there. Camaraderie, the second pillar, is really trying to address that gap in our culture right now, which is that most men are, even if they wouldn't characterize themselves as this word, most men are isolated. And what that just means is that few of us have any real friends. You know, the average American male has less than one close friend. I don't know how you have less than one, but you know, it's just the statistical, you know,
Yeah.
the way the math works out. We have less than one close friend. And that's not enough to survive. You know, God made us as men to exist in these kind of tribe communities. We were built for smaller communities where we connect closely with other like-hearted and like-minded men. And this very like lone wolf alpha male kind of mythos that we have built up in our culture really just isn't healthy. It's not how we're built. It's not how we're meant to survive. And honestly, it's not a good thing. Like the lone wolf is actually like the wolf that ends up getting taken out first. You know, it's not a good thing to be a lone wolf in a pack. You're supposed to be a part of the pack. That's how wolves operate. And we've kind of turned it into this like badge of honor to be this sort of like self-sustaining, you know, I don't need anybody kind of guy. But that's not really how men are built. So the challenge is we don't have places in our culture where men naturally connect anymore. You know, slowly over the past couple generations, most of those places have gone by the wayside. They've eroded for a number of reasons. Culture has just shifted, our time and our schedule has shifted, our workplaces have shifted. There's just all kinds of reasons, but the long story short is that men don't have men's spaces for the most part anymore. So we get out of college or out of high school and we get into the workforce, and we all of a sudden aren't around a bunch of peers anymore. We might see, depending on the kind of work environment that you're in, you might see 3 or 4 guys consistently on a day-to-day basis, and that's it. And some of them you probably don't like very much. You know, they're not people that you would actually want to be friends with. Or you might be like me and you work from home, and the only people that you see regularly are on a screen, and like there's no real way to develop close friendships with people like that. So, you know, what I've just kind of tried to say is that we need some guidance. We need some sage wisdom on what it looks like to recover building the art of friendships for men. So, I say, kind of within that umbrella of camaraderie, there's 2 big things that men need to prioritize when they're building friendships with each other. One is trust, and the other is shared experience. So, shared experience just means doing things together. In tribe language, we call that adventuring. You need some guys that you do some adventures with. And this can mostly just be for the sake of fun. It's just creating opportunities to go do things with other guys that are fun, that cause you to get out of your normal rhythm, that allow you to drop the responsibilities of work and family and everything else going on in your world, and just enjoy being with some friends for the sake of play. Because it's in those spaces that men really begin to bond and connect. It's in those kinds of adventure times. And I say adventure because usually we say fun for men needs to have a little bit of challenge to it. It needs to have a little bit of element of danger. Now, you can do something fun like, you know, go to a ball game together, and that's great. But if you can go somewhere and do something that's got a little bit of risk involved, it's even better. And so in doing that, you create shared history with each other. And those are the kinds of things that really bond men together. When you've got stories to tell and memories to go back to and things to laugh about that you've experienced together, those are the kinds of friendships that men treasure. I mean, we hang on to those things. And you think about the guys that you knew closely in high school and college, it's because you had a lot of that kind of shared history with them. You did a lot of things together. You were spending a lot of time together, and it just naturally led to these kinds of memories and experiences that don't tend to happen for most guys in adult life. So we've got to kind of recover that piece of adventure. The other
Wow.
part of it is trust, is that men really do need to build trust in their relationships with other guys but we don't start from that place. Most guys don't start at a place where they are naturally very trusting of other men, especially not at the level that we need to be trusting in order to develop a close friendship. So we have to take time to get there. And the way that we do that in the tribe model is we use two words. We call it get naked. And it doesn't literally mean get naked, although, if that's your thing, hey, more power to you. But it just means you've got to strip down a little bit in terms of being able to expose what has made you into the man that you are today. Tell some guys your story. What has shaped you? What are the things that are affecting you? What are the things that you're struggling with? Where are you really having a hard time in life? What's actually going, if we pull back the layers and, peek under the hood, what's really going on with you as a man? Strip down, let some guys know what's going on with you. And that's where trust really begins to develop. When guys get to know each other at that kind of level, then all of a sudden you've got men who you can actually count on. They know who you are. They know what shaped you into the man that you are today, and they can go to bat for you. They know how to protect you. They know how to stand on your side and defend you from the things that are coming at you. They know how to be there for you in the midst of things that are really tough. And that's the kind of trust that men need in their relationships in order to actually build the camaraderie that we're looking for in a tribe. So again, adventure, get naked. Those are the kinds of things that we try to go after for the sake of building camaraderie in a tribe.
Well, I got so many notes, I'm running out of room.
I'm talking a lot too. So yeah.
No, man, no, it's like, it's just to put it into a perspective. As you were sharing, I'm picturing, my dad was landed in France on D-Day +10, so day 10.
Yeah.
And he, enlisted as a private first class. He came home from the war, and he was a staff sergeant.
Okay.
So the field promotions.
Yeah.
50 years later, he was still connected with and talked with, and the best they could physically gather together, maybe once a year, maybe as they got older, it was more like once every, 10 years.
Yeah.
To the time he died, and he was 80 some odd years old.
Yeah.
And that camaraderie, that's what I picture. And it was horrific circumstances, but that camaraderie grew once they got out of the horrific chaos and challenges and everything involved in war.
Yeah.
And then
I think that's, kind of to your point, I think that's why camaraderie as a word gets so often associated with the military, and especially men in the military. Is because, that intense crucible of experiences really does forge men together. That is a shared experience that is unlike anything else. I'm not part of the military. It's not something I've walked through, but you see the effects of it. That story that you told about your dad is told about nearly every guy who has come through a war era experience. The guys in his troop, platoon, whatever it is, you name it, like there's a bond there that can't be replaced. There's just nothing else that can fill that gap. And, most of us are not going to experience the pain and the intensity of that kind of shared experience, like we do, like those guys do in war. But it doesn't have to be that intense in order to be able to still, form those kinds of connections. So like in my tribe, we've done some things together that have been, it's the kind of stuff that like we go back and talk about years after the fact and laugh about and, rehash the memories and the stories of what we did there. Like we did one night where we went and took an archery class together and then went for, steak dinner and some beers afterwards and just laughed. And like, all of it was super fun. We went last year for a weekend where we went whitewater rafting together. And it's like those kinds of things are the spaces where we've got some intense memories around those things. We love like talking about and telling those stories. We love talking about like, how one guy fell out of the boat. And I mean, it's just, it's like the things that guys do and make fun of each other for, like that's the kind of stuff that bonds us together and creates relationships in ways that a small group discussion never will. Like it's not that we shouldn't have small group discussion, but it will never fill in the way that adventure really can.
Again, you're painting you know, pictures with words. And here's what I picture is watching an old um, Roman army uh, movie, and the commander yells "shields up," and everybody covers up, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they gather together. But at some point, shields have to come down, and
Yeah.
it's at that point when they come down that you can have the discussions
Yeah. Right.
and whatnot. And another great book. I told you this is going to be a fun, exciting. I mean, if you can't tell, I'm just like soaking this all up. Another great book to put it in perspective about building, in a weird way, building camaraderie is Robin Dreek, who's going to be on the show here in about a month. FBI hostage negotiator. He was the international
Okay.
hostage negotiator, but American was taken hostage in the Philippines. Boom. Robin was the guy that gets called. And he's written a great book. And I'm like, I have so many underlines and notes written in the sides of
Yeah.
the
Cool.
pages and whatnot. And it's called Never Split the Difference.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
you know what? I'm getting my characters mixed up here. Not characters. Because I'm reading two books at the same time, Chris Voss and Robin Drake. Robin uh, was in counterterrorism,
Okay.
developing um, in spies to be spies for the U.S. kind of deal, and the things he talks about in developing relationships and getting the shields down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what it's just it's what you're talking about that we are so because here's what we want safety, security, prosperity, and control in our lives, and we get so
Hmm.
consumed with being hyper alert about anything that is challenging or threatening one of those four areas.
Yeah.
And I think for men is we that control part. I'm not going to show weakness. I'm not going to talk
Yeah.
about how I need some help, which I want to get into because then what we want is that freedom. And you
Yeah.
talk about it, fight for one another to find the healing and restoration that only Jesus can bring.
Yeah.
That
That's right.
all that guilt, all those things that we carry with us that will prevent us from developing camaraderie, from living a
Yeah.
true, manly manhood life of like Jeremiah, said, I knew you before you were um, formed in your mother's womb, and I
Yeah.
consecrated you for a purpose before you were born. And we spend our whole life trying to find that, but at the same time, afraid to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so what's that third pillar? That freedom, that release of that bondage of, hey, dude, it's all right uh, to have issues
Yeah.
and still be a true man.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. You've teed it up really well, and honestly, this is my favorite of the three pillars, because this is where I think men are the most in need, and the least engaged in actually doing some things to be able to make progress here. But it's also where the most transformation takes place, and this is where the tribe really can be very incredible for each other. So when I talk about freedom, we're freedom. That's the third pillar, and when I talk about it, we're talking about overcoming the major obstacles in a man's life. And so, you know, the thing about men in our world today is that because of this like isolation epidemic that we're living in, most men are struggling in silence. All men are struggling, right? Most men are struggling in silence. It just means that they don't have anybody that they can talk to about the hard things that they're dealing with in their lives. Maybe they can talk to their wife about it if they're married and they trust their spouse. Maybe. But a wife's counsel and confidence is never going to be the same kind of counsel and confidence that you're going to get from a tribe of men around you. It's never going to challenge you in the way that men will. It's never going to push you towards freedom the way that a group of men will. And, you know, what's just true about a group of men that's not true about your spouse is that the group of men around you don't have as much at stake if you fail, right? When your wife is giving you advice or counseling you on how to get better as a man, there's a lot at stake for her. If you don't succeed and come through in some ways, it's going to negatively impact her. So she's got something at stake when she's telling you how you need to, shape up. For the guys in your tribe, they obviously want to see you succeed. They want to see you do well. But if you fail, it's not going to ruin their lives. Like you're probably not that intimately connected with each other that it's going to have some kind of real fallout for them. They just want to be on your team. They want to be there for you. And so it gives them actually some freedom to be able to challenge you a little harder because they don't have as much invested in the outcome. So it's actually a better way of being able to pursue freedom is having some guys around you who, aren't your spouse, who can help you be able to do that. This can look like anything in a guy's life, but I think the places where I see it most often right now are areas of sexual struggle. So pornography in particular, it's 90+% of men who are dealing with pornography in our culture right now. So it's ubiquitous. You got a guy in your group, he's dealing with porn. You can pretty much bet on it. For guys who are married, it's marriage issues. Marriage has become one of the most difficult relationships to navigate in our culture largely because of our confusion over gender, right? Because we don't really know what a man is supposed to do. We don't really know what a woman is supposed to do. And because we can't figure those things out, we sure don't know what we're supposed to do together, how to make those two things really work.
Yeah.
So marriage is just, it's a mess for most couples. And guys in particular have nowhere to turn to be able to talk about those things. And the way that women talk about it to each other often isn't very helpful for men. It doesn't really resonate with the way that we think about how we need to handle our marriages. So sexual stuff, marriage stuff, parenting stuff for guys who are dads, those can be real challenges. This generation of kids and the things that they're dealing with is so radically different than what most parents grew up dealing with that it does become really, really difficult to be able to do those things. But your challenges can be anything. They don't have to fall in one of the major categories. One of the ones that's kind of rising up, especially for younger men right now, is the whole area of sports betting. Just what you're doing on your phone and how you're using your money to be able to place these, these little small micro transactions through FanDuel or DraftKings or, any of these kind of sports books on your phone. It's becoming a major addiction for a lot of guys, but nobody talks about it because the only way that it gets talked about is like, this is fun. And this is just what every guy is doing, but every guy may be doing it in some ways that aren't healthy, or you're doing it in some ways that aren't healthy. And who do you have to talk to about that? Anyway, I'm kind of painting the picture here, but the reality is like, guys are struggling. We are dealing with some things of significance. I heard another statistic today that just said, the number one killer of men under 50 is not heart disease. It's not anything actually like physical related. It's suicide. The thing that's killing men is ourselves because we are isolated, we are despairing, and we have nowhere to turn to be able to look for hope. So freedom is something that we have got to be able to pursue. And we do that some specific ways in the tribe context. We start by just saying that we have to acknowledge that these things that we need to overcome, we're not going to overcome on our own. Like if we could have done it by ourselves, we would have already done it, right? So we need some help. We need help from the men around us, but mostly we need help from Jesus. If we're going to get free of those things, we need someone who can actually free us. Guys around us can give us good advice. They can challenge us. They can push us, but they can't free us. They can't break us from long-held bondage and chains to things that, have existed since longer than we have, things that are more powerful than we are. Guys can't break us free from those things. Only Jesus can do that. So we need ways of being able to point a guy to Jesus. And the way that we do that is through something called chiseling. So we have a model that we do in our tribe context where we chisel a guy. And it really just means that when we get together as a group, instead of doing kind of your standard like small group discussion where we have a topic or a passage for the night and a set of questions that we kind of go through and everybody goes around the circle and each guy gets a chance to answer, we actually do it a little different. We focus on one guy for the whole session. And so he's the guy that's getting chiseled. And what that means is that he comes to the table with, here's an area in my life where I know I'm not experiencing the freedom that I could be or that I would like to be. And, this is what that area looks like. And so then he kind of walks us through a process of sharing what that looks like, helping us understand his story, giving us the full picture of what's going on. I talked about getting naked. This is where he strips down and just tells us everything. What's happening here? And then we as the tribe kind of surround him by exploring that with him. give us some more info. We ask more questions. We ask a whole bunch of things. Well, why do you think this is happening? How has this happened to you in the past? What is it? What's it affecting about your other relationships or the way that's impacting the rest of your life? We try to explore it from every angle. What God might be, what might God be up to in your life that this thing is an issue right now? So we try to do all of those things. But then we end, and this is what's really critical about chiseling. We end not by trying to give the man some advice. So we try really hard to say, this is not an advice giving kind of a thing. This is going to be a listening kind of thing. So at the end of chisel is an acronym, and the last letter is L. L stands for listen. And what that means is that we're just going to go listen to God in prayer. So we end every chiseling session with just some time of quiet where we listen for the voice of God and ask him to speak to the man through the other men in the tribe. So we're trying to listen on his behalf and see what is it that God wants to say to him. And then we just try to speak those things out to him. It doesn't mean that we always get it right? It's a subjective process, and sometimes we make some mistakes, but we have some guidelines for how to be able to do that well and what that can look like. But more often than not, it becomes incredibly transformative. We see Jesus show up through the Holy Spirit in some ways that are just unbelievable in releasing a man from bondage and giving him some next steps to be able to address and speaking words of life to him and affirming him in some ways that he really needs, some encouragement or validation. And amazing things happen during that time of listening prayer that would never happen if it was just about giving advice. So that's where we love to see freedom take place. And then we have some kind of follow-up things that we do from that to encourage a guy to continue to put what he's heard into action. But the process is really all about the same. It's how can we, as your brothers, fight for you by taking you to the one man who can actually bring you freedom. And so we've got a process for what that kind of fighting actually looks like.
Wow. More notes. Now I'm way down in the corner, writing even smaller on my paper. And some things that come to mind. And our Inferno men's group is in our we had the big group, which has the big conference and great speakers and stuff like that. But then on the weekly basis, we're talking, there's only maybe 9 to 15 guys. And we have a similar, we don't call it chiseling, but we do check-ins. And, hey, how do you see God working in your life since we last met? So a positive. Then, hey, what area are you struggling with? Same thing. We're not going to solve your thing here, but share it with us. And then, hey, afterwards, I grab a beer. I can come over and go, hey, or we can ask, some follow-up questions to try and get you. And I call it that shield. Drop your shield and share.
I love that picture, by the way. That's really good.
And but then, as you're talking, I'm going, because people today, although there is a huge revival going on within the Catholic Church, that dioceses in the United States are seeing 100-fold increase in what we call reverts, fallen away Catholics, or converts that have been agnostic, have been atheist, have been another denomination, and 100% increase in people coming back to the church in just 1 year.
That's so great, man. I'm so encouraged by that.
It is, and so people are feeling, and I think, and I'll give credit to athletes for this, is we as men, particularly in the men's sports, that famed quarterback wins the big game. First words out of his mouth are, "I give all the glory to God," so that it's becoming more acceptable, in quotes, for men to talk about their faith. And I'm reminded from specifically 4 people in Scripture that Jesus was their solution, if you will, and how they chose was extremely different outcomes. And you think of Peter, who denied Christ, and then he leaves and weeps bitterly, but he comes back, to Christ. And it never says in Scripture that he asked for forgiveness, but he came back even after denying who he had previously confessed to
Yeah.
be the Christ. In contrast, doubting Thomas, who goes, "Man, dude, unless you prove it, I'm not going to believe what you tell me you saw and heard. I got to experience it myself." And then once he does, he goes from doubt in the upper room where Christ comes in, "Hey, put your fingers in the nail holes," and that experiential um, coming to Jesus, and then he professes, "My Lord and my God," and then and I hope I never have to have either one. Actually, I don't. I really don't want any of these experiences. But you take Saul, who becomes Paul. God got his. He didn't come to Jesus on his own.
Yeah.
Jesus came to him in a
Yeah.
very dramatic way. But the same outcome. Jesus was the solution, and then their life after that. Um, uh, and I'm going to ask you a question in just a second. But their life after that experience, and there was something very particular that came with it, for them to then grow into their calling and their vocation. But the last person who um, denied all that was Judas. And he made his choice, but he had a different path he could have taken. Yeah, throw the silver back, but then go back to Christ and go. And this is the key. I want you to chime in on this. The question is this: how much is forgiveness a component of freedom?
Oh, it's not just a component; it's a foundation, right? You can't have freedom without forgiveness, and sometimes that's forgiving the person who has done you harm. Sometimes it's forgiving yourself for doing harm to another. Um, Sometimes, yeah, honestly, and I've had to do this myself. Sometimes it's forgiving God, because it's not like God has actually done you harm,
Yeah.
but in the way that you've experienced it, that's what it feels like. And in order to be able to right the relationship with God, you may have to extend forgiveness because what's actually chained up is your heart. And forgiveness is what unlocks those chains. So yeah, there's like I say, forgiveness is a foundation when it comes to healing and when it comes to freedom. That if you're gonna be able to get there, there's got to be forgiveness. Oftentimes, it's asking someone else for forgiveness if you've done them harm. Um,
Yeah.
I see this all the time with guys who are dealing with pornography or some kind of other sexual struggle. And I keep saying pornography because more often than not in our culture, that's what it is with guys right now. But it can be lots of things. But guys need to do the work of forgiving themselves. The amount of shame that guys feel around their pornography usage and habits over the years, and the way that they've hidden it from the important people in their lives, the way that they know it's done damage to their relationships, but they've not been able to talk about it. Like there's so much shame and brokenness around that. And guys who don't forgive themselves for the way that they have done those things wrong aren't ever going to find freedom from the behavior, right? The solution isn't just to not look at porn anymore. The solution is to be free of the bondage that porn has you in. Those are two very different things. And you can stop the behavior without getting any forgiveness, but you won't be free. If you want real freedom, there's got to be forgiveness in the process.
Yep. And I've never. I only know about it. I've not experienced it, although I was on the receiving end of of an incident. But the 12 steps in AA, and that one of them about forgiving yourself, and then
Yeah.
going to the people that you have harmed, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and I don't know the inside process of how this works, but
Yeah.
we had an officer that I had to relieve of duty, and he was going to get specs and charges or something, and so I had to take his gun and badge and serve him with the paperwork, and then which I did, and then it was almost a year later, and he resigned from the department rather than go through the discipline. it was almost a year later. He stopped by the office and asked the secretary if he could come in and see me. And I said, yeah. So he came in and he actually, he didn't use the words, I'm sorry, but something akin to that. And that he didn't hold it against me. I was doing my job, and that he'd been sober now for almost a year, had started his own business, is doing well, and just wanted to, clear the air, so to speak. Uh, and the other thing I think of is the prodigal son. And I know you said sometimes you have to forgive God, but so often what we fail to do is we think that we've only hurt our spouse or our kids or whatever it is, some other person. But you take the story of the prodigal son, and when he returns, he goes, I've sinned against you, my dad, and my God. And that we have to, and some people will say, and I don't mean to, this is not a criticism. It's just a difference in same concept, different approach. Is a lot of, only in the Catholic Church is there a formal process of confessing your sins to a priest, another man. So man to man kind of deal. And part of that confession of your sins, your failures, is what's called an act of contrition, which includes out loud saying, I have sinned against God and I'm sorry. And when you do that, as opposed, and you're doing it in a form of accountability for yourself and to somebody else, and it's literally coming out of your mouth, it's a lot different than saying, well, I had some quiet time today and I offered up my sins to God and I know I'm forgiven. I get that.
Yeah.
I'm just, my personal experience is that power of one, you talk about, it takes, I'm going to use a little Irish word, a shite. And it's easy, just drop a letter and you'll have the American word.
Yeah.
It takes a shite load of courage and humility and strength and honor and allegiance to verbalize your failings and to verbalize it to another person and asking for that forgiveness. And right. I think psychologically, physiologically, spiritually, it's just, you talk about freedom. It's incredible, as opposed to suck it up, buttercup, and get on with your life.
Yeah.
kind of mindset.
Right. The Catholic Church probably wouldn't like me calling it this, but that act of confession with the priest, there's a lot of getting naked in that process, right? It is. I'm gonna go
shields down, shields down, your shields down.
Yeah. I'll literally go get naked with the priest. But that's a different story. But that's what we're talking about. That is the level of humility and honesty that we're talking about. Is that the shields have to come down, the walls, the mask, the facades, the pose, everything. It's all got to come down. The BS has to go away in order to be able to really get at the, what's really going on in your life. And that's where relationships can be built. And that's also where freedom and healing can really take place. So it's absolutely necessary.
That's why we say, man, real people with real problems and stories and reaching real solutions together. No excuses. What an incredible conversation. And other than we talked on the phone a little, a few weeks ago or whatever it was, this is the first time we've seen each other face to face virtually, or, it's these kind of conversations like we're having that you're advocating, I'm advocating, that the tough love is you have to have these types of conversations, and not just once. It needs, that whole idea of, and I don't believe in the 21-day rule. If you do something for 21 days, it becomes a habit. No, it doesn't. It becomes a habit when you intentionally, you have that thought and you go, that I'm going to do what is right. I'm going to strive to always do what is right at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons. Not just occasionally, but always strive. And I know I'm going to fail, but if I have that mindset, then that becomes the habit because I display that in my behaviors. And I think what you're doing is great. How can folks meaning men, or maybe even a wife wants to reach out to you and go, hey,
Yeah.
my husband really needs to hear this message, but I don't know how to bring it up to him. Can you tell me what is the best way of communicating that I can encourage, not order my husband to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to go kind of the passive route there, I would say maybe the easiest way is to just get a copy of my book. It's called How to Be a Man. You can get it, Amazon, pretty much wherever you can get books. I would say a better way, I think, of kind of getting into the content and what we have to offer at Manhood Tribes is actually have a free quiz that guys can take that's called How Manly Are You? You can actually go to howmanlyareYou.com, and it's just an assessment to be able to kind of evaluate yourself along those 5 marks of manhood, how to see where are you doing well, what could you be doing better in, and we kind of give you some things to be able to challenge yourself and how to take some next steps. But then that'll also kind of get you exposed to some of our other content. And if you've heard some of what you've liked today and you're like, man, I'd like to give this tribe thing kind of a go, we'd love to help you with that. But that's really the easiest way to get started and to kind of get a foot in the door. So howmanlyareYou.com, and just go take that free quiz. It's fun.
Awesome. And give me the book name again, because I know I have.
Is How to Be a Man.
All right. I'll make sure these get in the notes for our listeners in case they don't have a pen or paper. And anything else? There is one other way to reach you, right? Manhoodtribes.com.
Yeah, you can go check out our website, manhoodtribes.com.
Okay.
You can email me, don@manhoodtribes.com. But if you take that quiz, it'll send you some links to be able to check out certain things on the site. So, that's probably the easiest place to get started and to remember.
All right. And your local in-person, face-to-face tribes in the Raleigh-Durham area, is that right?
Yeah, that's where I'm at. But the way that I do work with guys is that I help you start your own tribe in your area. So
okay.
I don't build tribes for guys to join. I build tribe leaders who start their own tribes in their area. I think all of your tribe relationships need to be local and close to you. So that's how I help guys be able to do that.
Okay. Awesome. Any parting last thoughts or words?
Man, I would just, Pat, I would thank you. Thank you for just being a guy who's trying to speak for guys and to help this kind of a conversation get out there. I think it's super needed. But I would say B, to the men listening, hopefully something kind of sparked your interest today and maybe moved you. And I would just encourage you, life is hard for us as men, and it's okay to be able to admit it. You need some other guys around you to be able to help you navigate your life the best that you can, and to be the man that you were really meant to be. So just know that every other guy around you is dealing with the same thing. And it's okay to be honest about that, and then to figure out how to take some steps that'll help you be able to get out of that place and grow better. None of those things are shameful or bad or things that you should be afraid of admitting as a man. And they're things that we'd love to help you with at Manhood Tribes.
Awesome. Don, thank you so much for being here today. This was why I love Tough Love Thursdays, is I can have these frank conversations and just encourage and inspire people that you're not alone, and there's real solutions out there for the real problems that you're facing. So thanks for being with us. To our listeners, I want to thank you so much. Your loyalty and your encouragement and commenting and sharing our episodes. We're now in 59 countries on 6 continents and growing. So thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. Follow us on YouTube at Warrior Servant Leader Podcast, as well as the same name for our website, or reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Substack at Pat Welsh JD, and check out our books on Amazon: Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Badge, and Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Cross. So until we meet again next week, remember, always, always, always strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what warriors, servants, and leaders do every day, every time. Love you all and see you next week.